Hey Russ, how you doing?
Good evening, everybody. And for those who weren't here last time, Happy New Year. Hope everybody is well.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Tonight we have a great program with Dennis Snelling. He's going to talk about his book on Lefty O'Doul. We got Tom O'Doul in the audience,
Hi, Tom.
who is his cousin, Lefty O'Doul's cousin. And John, I can't butcher your name, but John L is here. He's working on a film on Lefty O'Doul also, so I'm sure he'll have some great things to say as well. Just to keep you informed of
Show the trailer, John.
just to keep you informed of what's going on. One of our members has a 20 by 24 framed Bobby Thompson, Ralph Branca shot her around the world autograph. If anybody's interested, it's $325. Just email me and I'll forward it to the gentleman. Okay. I'm not here to make money. He just asked if anybody wanted information.
Oh, Gary, I got the video from, I guess it's Mo's video, but I
Yeah,
haven't received an invoice to pay for it yet. It came
Okay.
in the mail today.
I don't deal with money, so you deal with
Okay.
George Greger on that. Thanks.
Okay, sure.
A couple of other things. Perry Barber's in the audience. Perry was inducted recently to the New York State Hall of Fame, and I'm sure she's thrilled to death that the Yankees hired a female manager for their low A team. So Perry, congratulations on both.
The Toronto
This was
Blue
the best
Jays
induction
just hired
speech
a
since
woman
Bob
too.
Ueckers.
And the last thing before we get two other things, I had a chat with Hall of Fame writer Bill Madden. Bill is, still works for the Daily News. He lives in Florida, and he wrote a book called 1954. A lot of it's on the Giants, and he just wrote a book on Tom Seaver. And he'd be very willing to do a Zoom, but he doesn't do nights anymore. So, it would probably be 10 o'clock San Francisco time, 1 o'clock New York time. If anybody wants to give me any feedback on if I should pursue that, or, he's a fabulous writer, no doubt about it.
Tell me about it.
So, I'll send an email out, but I just want to inform you on that. Our next meeting will be in 2 weeks with Ken Davidoff. It'll be right after the Hall of Fame vote is counted on Tuesday, and we'll be here on Thursday. In February, we got Dan Mortel is going to be speaking about the gentleman who was shot at the Polo Grounds. Storm and Norm Coleman is going to be talking about his incredible San Francisco Giant autograph search and find, as he has every member of the Giants who ever played a game and autographed since 1958. Tonight, Dennis Snelling is a famed baseball writer. He's written many books, and I pursued him because Lefty O'Doul was recently up for induction into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, he did not make it. That being said, he's an incredible figure in baseball history in New York, in Japan, and in San Francisco. Dennis's book is called Baseball's Forgotten Ambassador. And we're proud to have Dennis Snelling tonight. Dennis, welcome to the New York Giants presentation.
Woohoo!
Well,
The
thank
floor
you.
is yours. You can talk about your book, talk about Lefty, whatever you want, then we'll have some questions and answers after, but the floor is all yours.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about Lefty. Thanks for having me here. Lefty considered himself a giant. That was his team. Of all the teams he played for, he always considered himself a giant, and so it's kind of appropriate, I think. Lefty is a very complex person to go after in a biography because there's so many facets to him. We have a discussion for 2 hours and still not hit on everything about him. He had a really unusual career if you look at it. 11 years in the major leagues, and a lot of people would think that he had partial seasons those first 3 or 4 years. No, he was with those teams. Those were full seasons, but he just was never played. He played 3 or 4 games here or there with the New York Yankees early in his career when he was a failed pitcher. But also, and then of course he became a great hitter. Some of his numbers, you look at some of his splits, they're really interesting. He hit 435 in the major leagues with the bases loaded.
Wow.
He with none out and the bases loaded, he hit 688 in his career. And he would go on streaks that were unbelievable. In the Pacific Coast League once, he had a 19 for 20 streak with the Dodgers in 1931. Apologize talking about the Dodgers here, but he had a road trip where he went 42 for 80. He once went 2 months without striking out. His big year with the Phillies in 1929, he hit 32 home runs and struck out only 19 times. The only man ever in Major League history to hit more than 30 home runs and strike out less than 20 times in a season. At the same time, he was a hitting instructor, one of the best in history. He coached both DiMaggio brothers, Joe and Dom. He also managed Vince, but Joe and Dom, he was a big influence on. Ted Williams, of course, saw him for the first time as a teenager when Ted was growing up in San Diego. Later signed with the Padres and went and asked Lefty for advice, and Lefty said, "Don't let anyone change your swing. You're great as you are." He tried to get the San Francisco Seals, who he was managing at the time. He really wanted to get a hold of Williams, but the Padres wouldn't let him go. Williams did use a Lefty O'Doul model bat the year he hit 406. It had Ted's name on it, but I checked with Louisville Slugger, and it was he really admired O'Doul and used an O'Doul model bat the first several years of his career. Ferris Fain was another player that he was very influential with. Gene Woodling, he kind of saved Gene's career. And one of the unusual hitting instruction jobs he ever had was with Gary Cooper in Pride of the Yankees, when he was brought in to turn the right-handed hitting non-athlete Cooper into a left-handed hitting Hall of Fame ball player. Did a decent enough job. Obviously, the movie has survived. But a lot of people don't know Lefty, starting his career as a pitcher, was also an excellent pitching instructor. I actually spoke to Ryan Duran not long before his death, and he saved Ryan Duran's career. Ryan Duran was on the way out of baseball. He pitched 1 game, I think, for the Baltimore Orioles and was in Vancouver. And Lefty really turned him around. Larry Jansen, for Giants fans, another guy who's very influential with Jansen. Jansen won 31 games for Lefty in San Francisco the year prior to him going to the Giants and winning 20 as a rookie. Then he was also very big into youth baseball. Just about everywhere Lefty went, he left behind youth baseball teams, many of which he had funded out of his own pocket. There was a big one in Brooklyn, San Francisco, Vancouver, when he was manager up in British Columbia. He would have these days for kids with free admission that were legendary in San Francisco during the 30s and 40s, where 15 to 20,000 kids would come free and baseball bats would be given to them. I have a couple of the small bats that were given out. It was an event every year. A lot of them kids from his old neighborhood, which we'll talk about a little bit, which he never forgot where he came from. And of course, he was a legendary minor league manager with several teams in the Coast League, primarily with the San Francisco Seals for 17 years. He had a couple shots where he could have managed in the majors, decided not to, and a couple times he was beaten out when he was interested. A couple of instances with the Giants where they were talking about having him come there, but he was, I believe, the 7th man ever to win 2,000 games as a minor league manager. And he was a scratch golfer. He won the amateur portion of the Pro-Am Bing Crosby tournament twice, 1949 and 1954. And then he started one of the first sports bars on the West Coast that was a landmark in San Francisco after he opened it in 1958. He also had a couple of other outfits before that. So a really varied career. Of course, he was best friends with Joe DiMaggio and was one of the 6 participants in the wedding of Joe and Marilyn Monroe. He knew everybody. Everybody knew him. And of course, Japan, where he really had his greatest influence, I think, and is a reason, in addition to his playing, why he deserves serious consideration for the Hall of Fame, and certainly the Buck O'Neill Award as well. So Lefty started out, he grew up in San Francisco out of a family of butchers, and kind of stumbled into baseball when a girl he was dating that day found another beau, and he had time on his hands, and his dad was a big sports fan and talked him into pitching for the local Native Sons of the Golden West team, and was instantly successful. He had pitched some in elementary school, one team towards the championship of the city of San Francisco, but had kind of given it up. He wanted to be a cowboy when he grew up. Believe it or not, San Francisco was a cow town for a while. Butchering was big, and they used to drive cattle and sheep through the streets of San Francisco back as late as the 1930s. And before he started playing baseball, it's kind of what he wanted to do. But of course, baseball took over, and he signed with the local San Francisco Seals. And from there, the New York Yankees signed him when he was, or acquired him when he was 22 years old. And he wanted to be a pitcher. And he was a pitcher who tended to weaken after about 7 innings. And somewhere along the line, he hurt his arm with New York. And Miller Huggins tried to talk him into becoming an outfielder because he was an excellent hitter. With the Seals one year, he hit 320, and the same year he hit 125 games and was used as a pinch hitter quite a bit. So Lefty, but Lefty liked the spotlight. Lefty in pitching, that's the spotlight. Everybody's paying attention to the pitcher, and he was stubborn about it. Along the way, he hurt his arm. The Yankees didn't use him. He went back to San Francisco for a year, then went to the Red Sox for a year, and they finally sold him to Salt Lake City. And pitching in the thin air of Utah at 4,000 feet, where your curveball, such as it is, I think one New York reporter said of Lefty that his curveball, he had a magnificent curveball. It fooled everybody once, but never fooled anybody twice. And the thin air finally convinced him to become an outfielder in 1924. And the Coast League of the 20s was a very different animal. None of the teams had working agreements with the major leagues. They signed their own players. They paid players as well or better than the major leagues did. The payroll was twice that of either the American Association or the International League at that time. And their players were not subject to the draft during the 1920s. And so players quite often got stuck. And he would spend 4 years of his prime years in the Coast League. Starting in 1924, he hit 392 for Salt Lake City. The first year he became a starting player. And in 1925 was on his way to hitting about 415 until he was hit by a pitch in September that broke a bone in his hand. He continued to play and fell to about 378. But and that got him a shot with the Chicago Cubs. William Wrigley signed him personally. He was the only player that Wrigley ever signed, and he always called him My O'Doul. And he went to spring training with the Cubs in 1926, but the new manager, by the name of McCarthy, didn't like O'Doul for whatever reason. I think partially O'Doul didn't take things real seriously. He was also coming off, I don't think his hand had quite recovered. And he was not a great defensive player. He never worked at defense like he did hitting. And so McCarthy cut him. And 4 years later, that decision would come back to haunt him when Lefty knocked the Cubs out of the pennant race in 1930. And 2 weeks later, in September 1930, with pinch hit home runs in consecutive games. And with Wrigley sitting in the bleachers in his hometown, Philadelphia, watching it happen. And McCarthy got fired 2 weeks later, and Rogers Hornsby got the job.
Yeah.
So he went back, played 2 more years in the Coast League, was MVP in 1927, and then the New York Giants came calling. John McGraw signed him in 1928. And he played pretty well, but McGraw wouldn't play him against left-handers. And that irked Lefty because he felt he could hit anybody. He hit 319 that year. And I think he started 4 games against left-handers. And the Giants ended up trading him after the end of the year to the Phillies for an outfielder named Fred Leach, who was supposedly 4 years younger, but it was actually, he'd been lying about his age. He's about 8 months younger than Lefty, who was already an advanced age. He was going to be 32 already in 1929. And he ended up out hitting Leach by 108 points. Leach had, I think, had 4 straight 300 seasons going into that year. Lefty, that was the year he hit 398 with 254 hits, 32 home runs, and the 19 strikeouts for the Phillies. And he loved that Life Boy sign out at the Baker Bowl. He said, I felt I could reach out and hit that thing anytime I wanted to. And he pretty much did. And then in 1930, he hit 383 for the Phillies, despite missing almost the entire or having to be a pinch hitter pretty much the last month of that season because of what they called a bruised shin. We probably call it a high ankle sprain today, which allowed him only to pinch hit. But again, he knocked the Cubs out of the pennant race, basically. And he remembered McCarthy. And after the second game, when a walk-off home run that for the second day in a row, he went running around the bases screaming at McCarthy, "There goes your gold," meaning McCarthy wasn't going to get into the World Series again. After the 1930 season, the Phillies were looking for more pitching help, traded him to the Dodgers. He would win another batting title in 1932, hitting 368 for his second batting title. And then he was traded to the New York Giants in the middle of the 1933 season for his second stint with New York. He was actually voted into the National League All-Star team that year. And if you look at the program for that year, he's actually printed as one of the starters. But there was concern about his range and fielding ability. There's a famous story where there was someone, it happened actually twice, once in San Francisco and once in New York, where someone was posing as Lefty and going into a bar and then running off without paying the bar bill. Lefty heard about it in New York and went and spoke to the owner and said, "So you know you haven't seen me before?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, so he gave him $20 to cover the bill, and he said, here's my advice. The next time that you come in, that a guy comes in saying he's going to take him out in the alley and throw him a ball. If he catches it, it's not me." So Lefty knew he wasn't a great fielder. Another thing, once he hurt his arm, he wasn't a great thrower either. And Bob Stevens, the San Francisco sports writer, famously said that Lefty could run like a deer. Unfortunately, he also threw like one. So Lefty was a self-deprecating guy, but in 1933, he made it with the Giants, was back with the Giants, and of course they won the pennant. And Lefty had been with the Yankees in the World Series a couple times, but never got off the bench. And in 1933, he wasn't sure he was going to get off the bench that year either. So in Game 2, he was brought up in the 6th inning with the bases loaded, and as a pinch hitter for Kiddo Davis, who'd actually played pretty well in the series to that point. But Bill Terry, who was on base, brought him in to pinch hit. And he ended up lining a 2-run single to break open Game 2 of the World Series against the Senators off General Crowder, Alvin General Crowder, who ironically he'd also pinch hit against in the All-Star game but was retired there. And it was the greatest moment in Lefty's career. He talked about running down to first base as if he was running on clouds. He also said he probably stepped across the plate but wasn't going to bring it to the umpire's attention. Anyway, but he hit that ball right where he wanted to. He ended up coming around and scoring, and New York broke open that game and took a 6-1 lead and really broke open the series. That gave him a 2-0 lead. Lefty would play one more year with the Giants in 1934, then retire as a player, went to San Francisco, where he was actually a player manager for a few years. Originally, he was going to play regularly, and part of his job was to prepare Joe DiMaggio for the major leagues. Not really as a player, but to understand what it was going to be like playing in New York and how to handle the press, etc. That was kind of his job. He said he really didn't need to do much with Joe as a player. He was in his third year already with the Seals, was already set for the Yankees, had already had a 61 game hitting streak for the Seals as an 18-year-old in 1933. In 1935 for Lefty at 398. And went up to the Yankees, and of course was great right off the bat as a 21-year-old. Lefty continued to play. He actually had moments. Although he didn't play very often, mostly as a pinch hitter. He did in 1938 as a 41-year-old. He had pinch hit home runs in both games of a doubleheader, and continued pinch hitting up through 1945 with the Seals. And then came back, and in 1956, at the age of 59, pinch hit in a game for Vancouver, making him a 5-decade player in the PCL, and hit a triple. They had brought the outfield in. He said he found the secret to hitting was to make the other guy fall down laughing until you could run around the bases. But at 59, he hit a triple for Vancouver in the Pacific Coast League. But what Lefty's biggest legacy is really Japan. And that started, Lefty first went in 1931 when he was with Brooklyn. And that was a group that Connie Mack had taken over, and a guy named Herb Hunter. And Lefty was sidelined in the midst of that tour with broken ribs when he was trying to give a Japanese players comeuppance. Both there was a lot of bench jockeying going on, and the guy saw what he was going to do and ended up meeting Lefty pretty tough, and Lefty broke his ribs. But it gave Lefty a chance to, although he couldn't play golf, he was upset about that, but it gave him a chance to get a feel for the Japanese people, and he really liked the culture. He was a true autodidact. He self-taught in everything, and he loved people. People energized him, and he loved going to museums, and he'd go on the waterfront and watch people and the boats in Japan, and got to know the people and the culture. He learned Japanese, loved the food, and vowed to come back. And he did the next year with Mo Berg and Ted Lyons and Herb Hunter, and did some instructing Japanese college players. And that laid the foundation for bringing Babe Ruth to Japan in 1934, which he played a major role in convincing Ruth to come. He had met a Japanese man named Satoru Suzuki, who had been working in New York during the 1920s, and he met him when he was with the Giants and maintained that friendship. And Suzuki had connections with a Japanese newspaper, and and O'Doul was in contact with him and talked to him about bringing Babe Ruth, which was the thing the Japanese had been wanting to do for at least a decade, and hadn't been able to convince Ruth to come over, and they really wanted him to come over before he retired. And so that tour went over in 1934, and O'Doul couldn't play because the National League didn't allow its players to play, only American leaguers play, but it was a gigantic success. And O'Doul kept going over until about 1938, when things got a little bit too dangerous for Americans to be in Japan. And of course, he couldn't go, during the war. So after the war, it's the 1949 tour that is really Lefty's major legacy. And it's where, even at the time, he was known as baseball's ambassador to Japan. He really had wanted to get back. And in 1949, Douglas MacArthur, who was running the occupied Japan at the time, was really concerned about the morale the Japanese communists were making inroads there. And he was looking for something that would lift the Japanese spirits. And someone suggested a baseball tour, and that Lefty O'Doul, who was the most popular living player in Japan, would be the best to come over. And Douglas MacArthur said, well, what are you waiting for? So there was another possible tour with Bob Feller and his All-Stars, but O'Doul was chosen and brought his team over basically because they would turn over all receipts. Any profits would go to the Japanese, and was really sent to deal with orphanages and youth baseball over there. When they came, Lefty was shocked at how he was, remember there were, by some accounts, 1 million people lining the streets for the motorcade when they came into Tokyo. And the Japanese were really touched by several things. One thing is orphans were really treated badly in Japan. Orphanages could only handle about 1/10 of the capacity that was needed, and a lot of them just hustled on the streets and were kind of those that were, and in fact, some that were in orphanages would have their clothes stripped so they couldn't run away. Lefty made sure that there was one game where they had the orphans from several orphanages there, and he made sure they got the best seats in the house, and the armed forces moved out of the way, the soldiers moved out of the way to make room for them. And there was a Japanese commentator who was really touched by that and amazed that the Americans would do that. It was a tour that really moved into diplomacy more than just baseball. It was the first time that the flags of the United States and Japan flew at the same time in the first game there. They ended up playing 10 scheduled games. The Emperor's son attended one of the games. There's a famous photo of Lefty shaking hands with him. Lefty actually got an audience with Emperor Hirohito at a sports event at the end of the tour, and the Emperor thanked him. General MacArthur called Lefty's tour the greatest piece of diplomacy ever. Said all the diplomats put together wouldn't have been able to do this. There's the uniform and bat that he used and wore. He actually pinch hit in a couple of games. There are in the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame. He is a member of the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame in recognition of the things that he did for Japanese baseball. He was inducted in 2003. And he went back after that. He brought Joe DiMaggio back with him in 1950. And then came back in 1951 with a Major League All-Star team. The 49 tour was just with the San Francisco Seals. He didn't want to bring an all-star team. He wanted to bring a regular team, and he was managing the Seals at the time. And he ended up bringing that team. But in 1951, he brought a Major League All-Star team that included Billy Martin was on that team, Mel Parnell, I think, and several others, a couple of coast leaguers. And they actually lost a game to the Japanese, the first one that Americans had lost to a Japanese team. Bobby Shantz was on that team. Dom DiMaggio was on that team that he brought. He went back in 1954 with Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe on a goodwill tour, and then brought the San Francisco Giants again in 1960. And then he also made trips to Australia with a Japanese team in the 1950s, a goodwill mission that the Japanese kind of wanted to mend relationships with Australia, et cetera. Lefty retired from managing after the 1957 season. So he managed in the Coast League for 23 years and won 2,094 games. He ended up opening a a sports bar near Union Square in San Francisco, which was a landmark for nearly 60 years, and ended up working some with the San Francisco Giants as a sometimes hitting instructor, especially in minor leagues, but ended up kind of walking away from it when a young player he wanted to work with didn't know who he was, and he felt it was time to set aside his career. So he spent most of his time at the bar rooting for the Giants. He ended up dying in 1969 of a heart attack after a stroke, and ironically on December 7th, 1969, anniversary of Pearl Harbor. But he remained a big, all through the 1960s. He went back to Japan several times. He was on Wide World of Sports, if you remember that program, a couple of times on broadcast of the Japanese All-Star game that they carried. And he was just a tremendous player, tremendous person. He was one of those most memorable characters. He developed so many players who went to the major leagues out of the Pacific Coast League, and was an excellent manager, excellent coach. Like I said, one of the few guys who could instruct both hitters and pitchers, and left an amazing legacy that I think deserves to be remembered and recognized. It is in Japan, and I think it's time that he's recognized here in the United States, whether that's for the Hall of Fame or through the Buck O'Neill Award. But really a fascinating guy, and created a lot of challenges in putting together a book on his career and life. Again, there's a lot of things that I've really just scratched the surface, but I want to give you a quick overview and then see if you had any questions. A lot of you know something about him already, but much more than just a ball player, much more than just, he really played a historical role in helping mend relationships between the United States and Japan. And that's something that's just now starting to be recognized. And of course, you can have he played somewhat of a role in getting Masanori Murakami to the US to play. And then, of course, would there be an Ichiro or Hideki Matsui or some of these other players if he hadn't played the role? He actually helped found the Tokyo Giants and brought them over for a couple of tours in 1935 and 1936. So he really helped establish professional baseball in Japan, helped found it. And those are some of the reasons that he's in the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame. So with that, I don't know if you want to show John's trailer or have some questions, or what order you want to do that in. But
first of all, we cannot thank you enough, Dennis. Great presentation. You have the definitive biography. If anybody's interested, best way to get it is through Amazon.
yes.
Okay, wonderful. John, do you want me to try to set that up? It's a 2-minute, 17-second film. Let's see if I can do this. If I can, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Gary. We have faith in you.
I don't know. I hope you do. Okay, let's see. Everybody see that?
Yep.
Yeah. Click that button over there on the lower right, and you go full screen, Gary. Other way.
This it?
Over that way. No, over more. Over the other side. It's all right. Just let it run. We're not hearing the audio.
start to play. When I was playing ball in the big league, my backs were jumping and the jump.
All right. Before we go to Dennis, John, do you just want to tell us where you are in production with this and what your hopes are?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to thank Dennis and both Tom O'Doul, who are very instrumental in helping me put that together. I started putting that together right when COVID began. And of course, it hasn't really gone away. And my plan was to do some crowdfunding to raise the money. These are very expensive to make. These films are very expensive to make. So my intention was to crowdfund and raise the money, probably going to be anywhere in the neighborhood of $65,000 to $90,000 to produce properly. And I didn't feel it was right to begin that campaign during COVID because it meant that I wasn't going to be able to go out and actually go places and interview people. Like go to Dennis's house where he lives in Northern California and interview him and all these other people. I've done films where last year I did a film for Sabre where we interviewed everybody over Zoom like this, and you can certainly do it. I don't think it's the right way to do this kind of film. So until such time as COVID subsides that I can safely go out and interview people and shoot this thing, so the program is kind of being held in abeyance in the time being, but we continue to keep the flame alive by sharing this trailer and making appearances at events like this to promote Lefty and certainly Dennis's book and Lefty's memory. And hopefully someday we'll get a chance to make this film, but that's where it stands currently.
John, thanks so much. And when it's complete, you're a guest here and to sell your film and to talk more about Lefty. So thank you.
One other thing I'd like to add, Gary,
Sure.
is that Arnold Haino, who wrote A Day in the Bleachers, I'm sure you're all very familiar with Arnold, who recently passed away at age 99, saw his first games at the Polo Grounds in 1926 when he was just a lad of 4 years old. I asked Arnold a few months before he died, actually while we were making the trailer, and I said, did you ever see O'Doul play? He goes, of course I saw him play. I went to the polo fields all the time. And I said, I remember a couple of things about Lefty O'Doul. Every time he came up, the ball was being hit off the fence, and there was Lefty sliding into second base.
Thank you, John. Dennis, I got two quick ones for you. First of all, why did you choose? You've written a lot of baseball books. Why did you choose Lefty O'Doul? And the second one is the voting that just took place that unfortunately he did not get into the Hall of Fame. What were your feelings about that? And when is he up again? In 10 years, I think it is?
That's my understanding. It's 10 years before that committee will meet again. I think it's unfortunate that contributions to baseball aren't thrown into the mix as much as they should be. Again, certainly, I think the influx of Japan, baseball is a global game. Obviously, Lefty has a lot to do with that, and I think he merits more consideration than that. When you look at his career, he basically had about 6 full-time seasons, and then the 7th season where he was playing as an outfielder, I think he drove in 46 runs and only 177 at bats, but mostly as a part-time player, obviously. So people kind of, I think with analytics and all that, they're parsing those numbers a bit. And I think, well, one, I think he's borderline even with the numbers. I think he's worth considering. And I think when you throw in the contributions he's made to the game, to Japan, to youth baseball, to hitting instruction, all of those things. Teams didn't have hitting instructors in those days. That was a fairly new thing. And he was one of the first to use film, for instance, in analyzing hitting, and would film both hitters and pitchers when he was with the SEALs. So I think the totality of that, I think he should be a no-brainer, but that's the way that it is. As far as why I ended up choosing him, is I had written a history of the Pacific Coast League prior to that. And so got familiar with Lefty, interviewed about 60 to 70 players for that project. And one of the questions I would ask them quite often, players, was who's your favorite manager, who's your least favorite manager? Lefty was the only one that would come up from both pitchers and hitters that he was on their favorite list. And that intrigued me. And then, of course, the more you get into the Coast League, he was a legend there. And so then I looked at it and go, well, you know, he's really the most consequential baseball figure I could think of that really hadn't had a serious biography written about him. And so it just seemed like a natural progression from writing about the Coast League into moving into Lefty and that whole thing. And then it brought in so many interesting topics. Like I said, Japanese baseball, minor leagues versus major leagues, switching from pitching to hitting, and having a frustrating career where you finally get your shot to be an overnight sensation at age 32. So a lot of interesting subtext there to his story.
Thank you so much. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to go Dave, then John, then Bill, then Mars, and then Tom O'Doul. I'd love for you to chime in also. Dave Lippman, you're up. Take your mute off, Dave.
Yeah, I'm just removing my hand here. My question is, as we know, Lefty O'Doul is one of the guys that Larry Ritter interviewed in The Glory of Their Times. So my question is, before I should say that was a tremendous presentation, by the way. My question is, how much of the Lefty O'Doul interview in The Glory of Their Times is accurate? Because as we know, there was a lot of, there's a lot of question about the accuracy and veracity of some of Ritter's other interviews, most notably the first one in the book, Rube Marquardt.
A lot of it was moved around. I got the copy of the original transcript. And so there were a lot of pieces moved around. I would say the quotes are accurate that are in there. And overall, I don't think it was too bad, but I think for purposes of the narrative, he moved sections around. It wasn't quite as fluid as it appeared, but overall, not a lot of some of the same complaints I've seen with some of the others.
Okay,
Let me jump in. Dennis, do you have the audio of that interview with Lefty and
No,
Pitt?
I don't.
I have a copy of the audio of it, and so I'll make a copy for you and get it to you.
I'd appreciate that. By the way, Tom was
It's an interview with Lefty at the restaurant before lunch.
Oh, okay.
So I will get it to you.
By the way, Tom was a great help. He was the first interview that I did for the Lefty O'Doul book, and he was a great help. And you'll have to ask him about the story of when Lefty and Joe showed up and surprised him. before he leaves. That's a great story.
All right, let's go on. John McLaughlin, you're up.
Hey, Dennis, great presentation. Just a couple of questions, and I guess just sort of a thing for the group that I can contribute if I can find it. Number one, how come, despite his numbers, how come he bounced around so much?
Well, I think you had smaller rosters then, you know, especially during the Depression, the roster shrunk a little bit below 25.
Okay.
And he was not a great defensive player. He did not have a great arm. He had good speed. He was an excellent athlete. One of the best, Charlie Graham, who ran the SEALs and had, you know, tremendous athletes come through the San Francisco SEALs for a quarter century. Thought Lefty was the most mishandled player who ever went to the major leagues and the best athlete he ever sent to the major leagues. But he never really worked on his fielding. He'd been a pitcher and then went to the outfield at 27. And so he just loved hitting and didn't love defense as much. And so I think that hurt him. And then I think once he got to the majors, again, when the Giants got him in 1928, he was already 31 years old. So I think there was that aspect of it too, that he was not a young player when he went back and got his real chance to play.
Got it. Who was the player who didn't remember him that made him walk away?
I don't think he's ever identified who it was unless Tom heard about it at some point. But it was supposedly a rookie. He was working with rookies in spring training.
Okay.
And this would have been around 1962 or 3, maybe 63.
Gotcha. And then the other thing is, I've actually visited the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame, and if I can find the pictures I have of the plaques, I was looking for them before, but I couldn't find the specific one of Lefty O'Doul. If I can find that, I'll email it to Gary.
There's also a copy at the Giants Stadium, yeah, Lefty has several things named for him at the ballpark. The bridge, of course, which leads from his old neighborhood, Butchertown, into where the new ballpark is. And then there's a Lefty O'Doul gate, and there's actually a Lefty O'Doul stairs. So he's well remembered by the Giants organization.
Okay.
Thanks, John. Bill Klink.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dennis, thank you for not just this book, but others you've written. You're prolific on that. And thanks, Tom, for stepping in as well. I had occasion a few years ago to write an article on the Pacific Coast League, and one of the subjects that obviously came up was Lefty. And there is an irascible side to him, Dennis and Tom. And I was going to share this, and maybe you've heard this or could elucidate upon it. Talking about Joe Brovey, it said few Coast League players will forget Brovey as manager, the irascible Lefty O'Doul. A feared hitter in the majors himself, he was equally known for his acid tongue. One incident in particular reveals this. In 1948, a good fielding but poor hitting shortstop Roy Nicely was struggling with a .240 average for a SEALs club that was battling the rival Oakland Oaks, for the Coast League Championship. O'Doul barely could contain himself. Jack Brewer, pitcher on that team, recalled to me. We were going across the Bay Bridge to play a series with Casey Stengel in the Oakland Oaks. Lefty and Roy and I were all in the car, and Lefty pulled over on the bridge and asked Roy, "Why don't you just get out and jump off the bridge? If I was only hitting a blanking .240, I could hit better with my blank than you can with this bat." Thankfully, Roy didn't take O'Doul up on his suggestion. As to the training, there's one other incident here from a training standpoint that casts a better shadow on Lefty. Despite his harshness, O'Doul was a good teacher. As the New York Yankees soon would find out, Brewer remembers in spring training of 1948, Gene Woodling was as dismal a hitter as he had seen. Lefty got him to put his feet together and put him in a crouch. Then, to keep him from lunging at the ball, O'Doul ingeniously put a rope around him in batting practice so he could literally hit the ball out of the catcher's glove. Woodling went on to hit .385 for the Seals that year and led the league in hitting before moving up to the Yankees juggernaut, where he played for many years. Your comments on I don't know if you'd heard that nicely quote. It wasn't nicely put, obviously, or the story of the training of O'Doul, if you could comment on either of those.
Well, I had not heard the nicely story. That's a good one. A couple other that I had heard. One, he really had problems with Casey Stengel when Casey came to the Pacific Coast League 46-48, and he was really jealous. Lefty kind of had the Coast League to himself for a while, and when Casey came out, all of a sudden here's another guy who can really attract attention. And he really took great pride in beating Casey. He called him, I beat that major league manager, so-called major league manager. And he won the pennant in 1946, beating out Oakland. There's another incident where Harry Elliott, when Lefty was managing in San Diego in 1954, when Harry Elliott, who ended up winning the Coast League batting title that year, but he decided on his own to bunt and ended up bunting into a double play. And O'Doul met him at the top of the dugout steps and just was screaming at him. And he said later Elliott found him in a bar that night and Lefty bought him a drink. Lefty would let it go after a while, but you know, and then another incident, he had a pitcher who was really struggling, and he found out that the pitcher really loved astronomy. So Lefty went out and bought a book on astronomy, and so he could talk to him about it. He tried to meet each player at his level, but yes, he could have an acid tongue, and he didn't suffer fools gladly, especially on the diamond. The Woodling story, yes, Gene Woodling always credited the whole rest of his career. He credited Lefty with saving his career, because Gene had kind of already washed out of the major leagues by that point, with I think Cleveland and Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And you know, he really Woodling became an all-star after that, and really credited Lefty with a lot of that.
Thanks, Bill. We're gonna go to Mars, and then Tom, then Ed Logan. Mars, go ahead. Mars, you gotta unmute yourself, Mars. Mars, you're muted. All right.
Okay, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, so Butchertown, I'm originally from New York City. I moved to San Francisco in 1967. I got a little history of Butchertown, which I heard now the voters are trying to change the name into Animal Rights Advocator Boulevard. But anyway, the questions I have, a little bit more serious, would be, I thought that Bill Terry replaced Lefty O'Doul at first base for the New York Giants in 1923. And my second question is about the bar. So Lefty O'Doul actually owned that bar first?
So Lefty never went to the Giants until 1928.
Okay.
And then he was an outfielder. He never was a first baseman. And he played 1928 with the Giants, and then was traded to the Phils, and then came back to the Giants in 1933 when Bill Terry was the first baseman manager of the Giants. And Lefty was again an outfielder pinch hitter for the rest of 33 and all of 34. The bar, he actually owned two bars. They were kind of around the corner from each other. He owned one in the 1940s and had to divest himself of it. The owner of the Seals, who ended up firing him in 1951, didn't like him spending his time at the bar and or golfing. Took a dim view of Lefty's extracurricular activities, and made him get rid of that one. Then after he retired, he opened the one in 1958 in partnership with another fellow, and then he ended up buying it out. At the time he died, he owned 100% of the business, and it was called Lefty O'Doul's.
That were
And
the one on Geary Street.
that was the one on Geary Street, right? And then it closed. He opened another one at Fisherman's Wharf, but that didn't, or he didn't open it, obviously. But it was opened, but didn't make it for a couple of reasons.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you for joining us.
So thank you for
All right.
inviting.
Tom, you're up. There you go, Tom.
Okay. Hello there. Oh, thank you, Gary, for the invite. And Russ, thanks for letting me know about it. Good to see John and Charles over here in the corner being quiet, which is unusual. I could go on and on with stories, but a couple of quick ones about the Hall of Fame. O'Doul was up for the early baseball era this year. That's, as far as I know, that's the first time he's been up in this category as a player and the veterans back in the day, but then he wasn't eligible for years. And then he was on the ballot this year. I'm just really pleased that Buck O'Neill got in. That's long overdue. O'Doul did get 5 votes, which was 31%. You need 75 to get in. So, and the next time he's eligible for the early baseball era award will be 10 years. So we got to do something in the meantime, because I may not be around in 10 years and I want to go back to Cooperstown for an induction. So right now we're looking again at the Buck O'Neill Award, which is an honorary award for an ambassadors to the game. And obviously he qualifies for this. We've been pushing for it for years. This is done only every 3 years. So this will be up again in 2023. So next year, 23, we have a shot at getting him into recognized in the Hall of Fame. On the plaque, there is the one in Tokyo that you saw the plaque in Tokyo. An identical plaque was made, and that's at the Stadium Oracle Park now. It's on the club level in Oracle Park all by itself with an explanation of what it is. When the Japanese came to San Francisco to present it to the Giants, because they asked me what did we want to do with this plaque, and I'm not going to put it in my garage. Nobody will see it. So we'll give it to the Giants, and they can find a place for it. So we got the plaque, and I told Peter McGowan at the time before he passed, put this plaque where everybody can see it. And he assured me that that would happen. Well, it's on the club level. Not everybody can get to the club level. You have to have a ticket to get up there. So this kind of upset me immediately. McGowan says not to worry. The Giants made a copy of it, placed it just inside O'Doul Gate, which is a gate entrance to the ballpark on 3rd Street, just off the bridge. So there is a replica of the plaque, the original plaque, that everybody can see. So there is 2, and there's one in San Francisco, which is pretty cool. And that's his hometown. So I could go on and on with stories about O'Doul. Not too many people have ever seen him play. John mentioned that Arnold Ano saw him at the Polo Grounds, and I never saw him play. I met him. He was a family member. He'd come to the house for dinner every once in a while, taught me how to hit left-handed. And a story that I think I should share with you. My dad would call him up and say, hey, Frank, can you come over to the kids' Little League game? You know, the opening day, it'd be cool if a major leaguer showed up. And he did come over a couple of times. But the one time I do remember was opening day. I was probably about 10 years old. My dad had said, Cousin Frank's coming over. So that's cool. Major leaguer is going to come to my game. Well, he shows up in his convertible, but he has somebody with him, and it was DiMaggio. And of course, very recognizable. All the kids knew Joe DiMaggio. The heck with Lefty O'Doul. We were happy to see Joe DiMaggio. So that was a real thrill for me. I'll never forget that. Back to the DiMaggios, another story. I was fortunate enough to meet Dominic DiMaggio before he passed away at an event in Oakland with the Pacific Coast League Historical Society. And I introduced myself, and he goes, "You're related to Frank O'Doul?" And I go, "Yeah, he was my cousin." It was like an uncle to me. He said, "I have to talk to you." So after the event was over, we cornered me in. We sat down. He told me told me stories about O'Doul. He said, you know, if it wasn't for Frank O'Doul, I'd have never played professional baseball. So that meant a lot to me. I met a lot of Pacific Coast League players over the years, and they all said the same thing. They all felt O'Doul was really special for them. And I really, nobody ever said anything bad about it. And I'm sure there were some bad stories about cousin Frank. One final little story. I was really fortunate to meet Buck O'Neill before he passed away. He was in his 90s at the time. He was at an event in Oakland again. I was called up. Did you want to meet Buck O'Neill? I said, absolutely. I jumped in my car. I'm over to Oakland. So the event goes on. There's a Q&A afterwards. So I'm talking to O'Neill. And he says, oh, yeah, I remember that kid, O'Doul. He's, boy, could he hit. Boy, that boy could hit. I go, yeah, he was quite a character. And O'Neill looks at me and he goes, well, you don't remember him. And I go, well, I'm not 90 years old. I never saw him play, but I do remember him. So, but O'Neill told me that boy could hit. Another story about teaching. Orlando Cepeda, okay, Hall of Famer, San Francisco Giant, well-known player. And I'm at a Q&A at the ballpark in the Gotham Club with Orlando Cepeda and Marty Lurie. And somebody in the audience asked Cepeda, did anybody ever try to change your swing? I've always tried to model my swing after yours. Cepeda looks directly at me and says, yeah, Lefty O'Doul tried to change my swing. But I didn't listen to him. It was a good thing he didn't. So Cepeda's in the hall.
Hey,
That's about all I have. If anybody has any questions for me, go ahead and ask and I'll see if I can answer them.
Tom, just so you know, in case you need any help, you know, we'll be behind you with our organization, you know, to get him in the hall or whatever you might need. We're here. Okay.
Thank you. I'll be in touch with you. It's a letter writing campaign.
Perfect. Ed Logan, you're up.
Yeah. Hi, Dennis. My dad, if you don't know, Eddie Logan was the clubhouse manager for the Giants, and he went over to Japan several times and was instrumental in Tokyo Giants equipment and uniforms. But back in the day, 58, I came out to San Francisco, and a couple of years after that, my dad and I went to O'Doul's. He took me to O'Doul's, and my dad was a great beer drinker. So he raised a lot of beers at O'Doul's. I had one or two. And, you know, he used to confuse me because there were two lefties, Lefty Gomez and Lefty O'Doul, that he idolized. He talked about a lot of times. So, and they were both, I guess, Seals team alumni. But I never met Lefty O'Doul myself. But any truth that he invented O'Doul's non-alcoholic beer or no?
No, he's not related to that, but they do sell, and Tom can probably, although Tom is having some there, but
no, I will not drink this.
Oh, you will not. Okay.
No, I got the real stuff right here.
We have nothing to do with this at all.
But they do have a Bloody Mary mix and a
yes, we have the Bloody Mary mix. That's for an old family
and
recipe.
the margarita mix, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and those are his recipes, I guess, or family recipes.
But my dad loved Lefty, talked about him all the time. And you know that Lefty Gomez was kind of the how would I say, he was supposed to oversee Joe DiMaggio when he came up to the Yankees, because Joe was very, you know, reticent and so on and so forth. So Lefty Gomez was his monitor. Yeah, if you remember that. So the two lefties, what did Lefty O'Doul interface with Lefty Gomez? How did that work?
I'm not really sure. I don't think they went together to Japan or not. No. But Gomez lived in Nevada before he passed away. So I met him a lot of times in Nevada. I lived in Nevada, and he would come to every opening Little League game, girls softball games. He was very prominent in the community, and there is a baseball field in Nevada named Lefty Gomez Field. So a lot of people think it's O'Doul because of the lefties.
Yes.
And, in fact, when when the committee was voting for the early baseball era, and the commentators were Bob Costas and Greg, what's it, Icelander. He mentioned, he said, well, everybody thinks Lefty O'Doul's in the Hall of Fame. He's not. And,
The other Lefty. That confused me as a kid too. My dad talked about both of them. I didn't know who he was talking about.
Gomez was a pitcher.
Yeah.
They
Right.
were good friends. They were
So
good
was
friends.
Lefty Grove.
Dennis, do you have time for a couple more or?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Andy?
Another player, Tom mentioning Cepeda, another player that Lefty did work with and turned him into a pull hitter. That was one of his projects that the Giants asked, was to turn Willie McCovey into a pull hitter. And so that was one of his big projects. Because when Willie McCovey came up, he was actually a spray hitter, believe it or not, all over the field. And so the Giants wanted him to pull, and they asked Lefty to work with him on that. And that was pretty successful.
Andy Baumgartner, you're up.
Okay, Gary. In the past at Bergino, Gary, we had Lefty Gomez's daughter. John just put that up.
Yes.
Now another great Lefty O'Doul, great presentation. He still holds the record, or shares it, I guess, with Medwick, 254 hits, National League record, most hits in the season.
Yeah, with Bill Terry.
Oh, Bill Terry. Okay, great.
Yes, he
Better.
still shares that record at 254.
Right.
National
And
record.
only two guys have more. Okay, it doesn't matter. But fantastic presentation. The fact he played so long, he was linked with Casey Stengel in the PCL, and the McCarthy you mentioned did go on to have a pretty good managerial career. Joe McCarthy, the certainly not the bad senator, and he and Stengel have the most world titles. So that's another fact. And I think nobody ever hit 399, at least past 1900, and Lefty hit 398, which is.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. And the thing that meant the most to me, my dad, many of us are here because of our dads. My dad was born in 1914. So the 33 title he would have remembered. That is a great note. Game 2, he had a big hit.
Yes.
Great. Great info. Thank you.
Well, and Joe McCarthy, so after Lefty basically knocked Joe out of the Cubs job, as you all know, Joe got his revenge against the Cubs with the Yankees in 32. So
right,
he turned around and got back at the Cubs. So
Johnny McCarthy played first base for the Giants after Terry.
Thank you, Arthur. Anybody else with a comment or question?
Yes, I have one.
Mars, go ahead.
Yeah, I was always, well, first a comment. Casey Stengel was supposed to go to dental school. Can you imagine him as a dentist? But more to the point is, the San Francisco Bay Area always had this relationship with the Yankees, where they had so many players who came from here. Do you know any an insight on why the Yankees brought up so many players from the Bay Area?
Well, they had a couple of scouts who were longtime Coast League people, Bill Essick and Joe Devine. And so they were Coast Leaguers for decades. And so I think their influence, those were their West Coast scouts, and they had that combination. And then I think just the Yankees started having success bringing those people. Now, O'Doul was one of the ones they didn't have success with, but they got Tony Lazzari, Mark Koenig, and
Lefty Gomez.
And so I think some of it was that interrelationship there. But that's my guess. I can't say that I'm 100% certain that's why.
They also got Billy Martin, Dr. Bobby Brown, of course, the great DiMaggio. It's just amazing how many came from here to the Yankees.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mars. Paul, go ahead.
Dennis, thank you so much for tonight. I think, when you mention Lefty Gomez's role in helping to broaden the interest of baseball across the world, as well as people, for example, we've talked about Horace Stoneham in bringing Latin Hispanic players along, and Alex Pompez working in that field also. It really adds a new dimension to what baseball, I think, in the Hall of Fame should become, which is certainly reliant on statistics and great players, but also the people that put the game in the position that it's in worldwide. And I think you make a very good case. And I think it's just really wonderful that that you have this nuanced approach to looking at baseball from both the player's perspective and the ambassador's level. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Anybody want to wrap it up with any question or anything?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that Lefty O'Doul should be in the Hall of Fame, and anything we can do to support that, I would be right there.
Between Dennis's book and John, that short clip was fabulous. It kind of sums up that he should have gotten
Yes.
should have got more recognition. Plus, with the talking about diversity and everything with the Japanese stuff, it's like a no-brainer. But Dennis, we cannot thank you enough. Please don't be a stranger. And again, if anybody's interested in definitive biography on Lefty O'Doul, just I'll send out the link, but you could also go to Amazon and pick that up. So Dennis, we salute you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And
Dennis.
thank you enough. And Tom, thank you so much. Russ, thanks for getting Tom aboard, and John, you as well. It's great seeing everybody. I'll be here to close out if anybody wants to chat. Arthur, I gave out the information about your proposal for your photo, okay, before you